They poisoned my lake, just to stop me from fishing. But what the HOA didn't realize is that the same water they poisoned flows straight into their homes, their sinks, their showers, and their kids' drinking glasses. What started as a petty war against me turned into a full-blown neighborhood disaster, and trust me, they never saw the revenge coming. They poisoned my lake just to stop me from fishing. That's the sentence I never thought I'd say out loud, but here we are. Even now, those words feel unreal, like something out of a bad movie or a twisted revenge novel. But this was no fiction. This was my reality. And it all started with a lake. Not just any lake, but my lake. A beautiful, crystal-clear body of water that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather dug the first channels by hand when he settled the land, and over the years, nature took over. Springs fed it, fish thrived in it, and trees leaned in close to shade its banks. By the time I inherited it, the lake wasn't just a piece of property. It was a legacy. A living, breathing reminder of my family's roots. To me, fishing wasn't about sport or trophies. It wasn't about bragging or showing off. Fishing was peace. It was waking up before sunrise, when the air was still cool and the world felt quiet. It was grabbing a simple rod, a small tackle box, and sitting by the water while the mist curled above the surface. The sound of the reel clicking, the gentle tug of a fish, it calmed my nerves, steadied my thoughts, and gave me a sense of belonging. Every time I sat there, I felt connected, to nature, to my grandfather, to the history that made me who I am. But apparently, not everyone saw it that way. My homeowners association president, let's just call her Karen, had other plans. She despised my fishing. She hated the sight of me by the water with a rod, as if my quiet hobby was somehow a personal attack on her vision of the neighborhood. She'd wrinkle her nose whenever she passed by. She once shouted across the street that fishing made the place look cheap, as if a man enjoying his own land could somehow drag down property values. According to her, my peaceful mornings disrupted the image she wanted to maintain. She liked things polished, controlled, and fake, perfect lawns, silent sidewalks, and no signs of life that didn't fit into her glossy little picture. At first, I brushed it off. People complain all the time, right? I figured her muttering and disapproving looks were just noise, annoying, sure, but harmless. I wasn't breaking any laws. The lake was mine, on my property, and no HOA rulebook could tell me what to do on my own land. So I kept fishing. Day after day, line in the water, heart at peace, pretending her scowls didn't exist. But here's the thing I didn't realize at the time. HOAs don't stop at complaints. They don't just mutter and move on. When a person like Karen decides she doesn't like something, she doesn't let it go. She obsesses. She plots. And she uses every ounce of power, every rule in the book, real or imagined, to bend the world to her will. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there. The nasty notes in my mailbox, warning me that my fishing violated community standards. The threats of fines I never agreed to. The hushed conversations at HOA meetings where she tried to rally others against me. I shrugged it all off, thinking, what's the worst she could do? But that was my mistake. I underestimated her. I underestimated how far an HOA president, drunk on power and blinded by control, would go to get her way. And soon, I would find out. It started with the little things. A letter tucked into my mailbox, printed on official HOA letterhead, telling me that fishing activities on the lake violated community standards. The first time I read it, I laughed. Violated what? The lake was on my land. There wasn't a single line in the HOA agreement about fishing. Still, I ignored it. A week later came another letter, this one more aggressive, threatening fines. Each day of non-compliance will result in a $200 penalty. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. I wasn't about to pay a dime for enjoying my own property. Then came the neighbors. A few of them stopped me at the mailbox, their voices awkward, rehearsed. You know, the board doesn't like what you're doing out there. It was clear Karen had been talking behind my back, trying to stir up support. The funny thing, most of them didn't even care. Some admitted they didn't see the harm, but they were afraid of crossing her. That's how much power she had over people. Intimidation, whispers, and fear. Things escalated fast. I started noticing strange little signs that Karen was watching me more closely. Whenever I'd head down to the water at dawn, I'd see her blinds shift across the street. Whenever I returned with a string of fish, she'd suddenly be taking out the trash, or checking the mail, glaring at me as if I had committed some crime. Then came the fines. Real ones this time. Official-looking invoices slipped under my door, demanding hundreds of dollars. Non-approved use of property. Disruption of neighborhood aesthetics. She invented charges out of thin air. And still, I ignored her. But Karen wasn't the type to take no for an answer. She escalated again. Late one night, I woke up to find my mailbox knocked over. A week later, someone dumped a bag of garbage near my dock. Childish harassment, sure, but it was proof she was willing to get her hands dirty. The breaking point came one Saturday morning when I went down to the lake and smelled something strange. It wasn't the fresh, earthy scent I was used to. It was sharp, chemical, almost like bleach. The water didn't look right either. A cloudy, greenish tint shimmered near the edges, and dead fish floated belly up. My stomach dropped. I rushed samples to be tested, and the results confirmed what I feared. The water had been contaminated with pesticides and chemicals. Someone had poisoned my lake. At first, I thought, who else could it be? Only one person had motive. Only one person hated my fishing enough to do something this extreme. But I also realized something else. Whoever did this wasn't just hurting me. The lake connected underground to the aquifer system that supplied water to the entire neighborhood. And that meant the HOA's little war on fishing was about to backfire in the worst way possible. When I first realized the lake had been poisoned, my heart sank, but I still thought the damage would be limited to me. I figured the dead fish, the ruined mornings, and the heartbreak were mine to bear. But within days, I discovered the truth was far worse. The calls started trickling in. At first, just one or two neighbors. "Hey, have you noticed the water tasting funny?" one woman asked. Another family called to say their tap smelled strange, almost metallic. I told them to stop drinking it immediately. By midweek, things had escalated. A couple down the street reported that their kids had broken out in rashes after taking baths. Someone else said their dishwasher was leaving an oily film on all their plates. People were panicking, and it didn't take long for them to connect the dots. See, what the HOA never realized, or maybe never cared to learn, was that the underground aquifer feeding my lake wasn't just mine. That water source connected directly to the neighborhood's well system, which meant every drop they used to cook, clean, bathe, and drink had passed through the same poison veins. Suddenly, it wasn't just my problem. It was everyone's problem. The neighborhood group chat exploded. People were posting pictures of cloudy tap water, videos of brownish liquid pouring out of sinks. One neighbor even filmed his dog refusing to drink from its water bowl. The panic spread faster than the contamination itself. And right at the center of suspicion? Karen, the HOA president. Everyone knew she hated my fishing. Everyone had seen her shouting about it at meetings, rolling her eyes whenever I walked past, complaining to anyone who would listen. She had built a reputation as the neighborhood tyrant, and now her fingerprints were all over this disaster. At first, she tried to downplay it. Sent out a mass email claiming the water discoloration was natural algae, and there was no immediate health risk. But people weren't buying it. Not when their kids were itching, their stomachs were upset, and their pets were refusing to drink. The anger spread like wildfire. Parents were furious. Elderly neighbors who depended on clean water for their medication routines were terrified. Even the folks who normally stayed quiet during HOA drama were suddenly demanding answers. And me? I was torn between anger and grim satisfaction. Yes, I had lost my peaceful mornings by the lake, and yes, my family's property had been desecrated, but now the whole neighborhood finally saw what I had been dealing with. Karen's obsession with control had crossed a line so massive, even her most loyal supporters couldn't defend it. The poisoned lake wasn't just a petty act of revenge anymore. It was a public health crisis. And it was about to bring the entire HOA crashing down. By the time the neighborhood realized how bad things had gotten, the HOA could no longer hide behind emails and excuses. A special emergency meeting was called, and for the first time in years, nearly every resident showed up. People packed into the clubhouse, buzzing with anger, fear, and desperation. I sat near the front, clutching the water test results I had paid for out of my own pocket. On the table in front of me were photos, dead fish floating belly up, green scum along the shoreline, even a jar of the contaminated lake water. It looked like something out of a horror movie, cloudy and sickly, reeking even through the lid. When Karen walked in, you could feel the shift in the room. Normally, she strutted around like she owned the place. But this time, the crowd didn't part for her. People glared. Parents crossed their arms. A few even booed under their breath. For once, she wasn't the queen bee, she was the villain. The board tried to start with formalities, but no one wanted to hear it. Voices rose almost immediately. A mother stood up first, holding her toddler on her hip. "My son has rashes all over his body from his bathwater." "Are you going to explain that, Karen?" Another neighbor shouted, "My family's been drinking that water for weeks. If something happens to my kids, that's on you." Karen stammered, trying to maintain her composure. "We don't know for sure what caused this. Jumping to conclusions won't help." That's when I stood up and placed the folder of lab results on the table with a loud thud. The room went quiet. "We do know what caused this," I said. "This isn't algae. This isn't bad luck. This was deliberate contamination. And we all know who had a motive." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale, then red. She snapped back, "This is slander. You don't have proof I had anything to do with this." I slid the photos across the table toward her. "Maybe I can't prove you poured the chemicals in yourself. But I can prove the lake was poisoned. And I can prove you've harassed me for months, trying to stop me from fishing. Ask anyone here if they've heard you yelling about it." "Go on, ask them." A man in the back stood up, voice steady. "We all know it was you, Karen. You hated him fishing. You threatened fines. You even bragged at the last meeting that you'd make sure he learned his lesson. Well, now we're all paying the price." Karen sputtered, looking for support, but the board members avoided her eyes. The tide had turned. Even her allies were silent, unwilling to sink with her. Finally, one father slammed his fist on the table. "You poisoned our water because you didn't like seeing a man fish on his own land? Do you even hear yourself?" The room exploded, voices shouting, demands for her resignation, calls for legal action. The board had no choice. They voted right then and there to suspend Karen pending investigation. The city was called in, and cleanup crews were scheduled. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like justice was finally within reach. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The weeks that followed felt like something out of a courtroom drama. Once the city got involved, everything moved quickly. Inspectors confirmed what my private lab tests already showed. The water had been contaminated with toxic chemicals, the same type used in pesticides. And the source? All signs pointed back to the shoreline of my lake. Cleanup crews moved in, setting up pumps, filters, and treatment systems. They posted warnings on every door: "Do not drink the water. Do not bathe in the water. Use bottled water only." Seeing those bright orange flyers stapled to mailboxes drove home just how serious this had become. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to contain the fallout. 4 years, they had operated like a little kingdom under Karen's rule. But now, with families furious and the city breathing down their necks, their empire was collapsing. Neighbors who once kept quiet were suddenly filing complaints, demanding refunds for fines they had paid, questioning every rule that had ever been enforced. The illusion of control had shattered. And then came the breaking point. The city issued fines, massive ones, for environmental damage and endangerment of public health. Because the HOA was technically responsible for community management, they were on the hook financially. But guess where the pressure fell hardest? Right on Karen. She was forced to resign in disgrace, her once iron grip slipping through her fingers. Word spread quickly that civil lawsuits were being prepared by several families who had suffered health issues. I won't pretend it was easy. My lake looked like a crime scene for months. The water was drained, treated, and slowly restored. The fish population took time to recover, and every morning when I walked to the dock, I felt both anger and sadness at what had been lost. But little by little, the lake healed. Nature has a way of bouncing back when people stop meddling. And through it all, something unexpected happened. Neighbors who had once been silent began to rally around me. Families started coming down to the lake, not to complain, but to help. They brought nets to scoop out debris, bags of sand to stabilize the shoreline, even fresh fish to release when the water was safe again. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. When the lake was finally declared safe again, I cast my line back into the water. That first tug on the reel felt like more than just fishing, it felt like victory. Not just for me, but for everyone who had been bullied, silenced, or intimidated by an HOA president who thought she was untouchable. And the lesson? Simple. Power only works when people allow it. The moment you stand up, the moment you refuse to be pushed around, the bullies lose their grip. Karen poisoned my lake to stop me from fishing, but in the end, she poisoned her own reputation, her own authority, and her own future. Now, every time I sit at the edge of the dock, rod in hand, I smile. The water is clear, the fish are biting, and peace has returned. Justice, in its own way, has been served.